Hello, champions of climate justice. It is good to see that young people are not just worried about climate change, but are taking the lead themselves in turning the tide. Showing leadership in tackling a challenge which my generation has, for too long, let run its course. We do not need to talk anymore about its urgency. It's now clear that to almost everyone that greenhouse gas emissions must end as soon as possible is, of course, a no-brainer. But how we do that is something we all have to think about. The effects of climate change impact poorest and most vulnerable of the world's population the most. A good argument for a robust climate policy. But how can we prevent the burden of climate policy from falling yet again on the shoulders of the weakest in our societies? The notion of climate justice implies that the climate issue is not just about restructuring the economy, but about social justice too. That human rights are also in the balance, which is why Youth for Climate Justice asked the International Court of Justice here in The Hague for a statement on climate change and the rights at stake. The ruling of the Supreme Court in Dutch agenda case, along with other examples both here in the Netherlands and elsewhere, show that the law can provide a strong impetus for more robust climate policy. It's up to you, the pioneers of young movements, to keep finding ways to get results. It is also up to you to help young people to think more deeply about climate justice. And what better place is there to do that than right here in The Hague's Peace Palace? I wish you all a successful event.
Everyone, good to see you all. I see some familiar faces in the audience. Hello. Welcome also to the people watching the live stream. I can't see you, unfortunately. I hope you all see me. My name is Eveke van der Wouw. I'm a Dutch intersectional environmentalist, and today is the right place to be for me because today we will talk about climate justice and the youth movement. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks also to the mayor for this short speech. He isn't here, but thank you for the applause as well for the mayor. As you can see on this is my left, to your right, we were looking at the International Court of Justice. And for me, it almost feels like we can ask them what we want. We're going to talk about something that's been happening for over the past months, which I find very, very exciting. A global youth movement started with the young people from Vanuatu, now with also youth from the Netherlands, which I happen to know, and I'm very, very proud that I know them. And what we're doing, and what young people have been doing for the past years, even though we have been in the midst of a pandemic, is pushing climate action, at least climate change, to the highest priority on the agenda of several parties. And I still get a lot of questions from people, you're so young, what can you do? Well, we can start a global movement. We can push it on the priority list of the agenda. We can come together to organize events like this. We can come together to ask for, and this is what the youth of Vanuatu started, to ask the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. I think we can give a round of applause for being here together, also celebrating this. Hi, welcome. You can see the program behind me. We're a little bit, we started a little later, but you know, same as addressing climate change, we have very little time and we're trying to do things as quick as possible because time is running out, a statement we keep hearing over and over. I think it would be very important to mention I'm going to do this at the end as well, but some of the organizations that made it possible for us to be here, because I don't think we will get that far by doing it all by ourselves. So it's a very, very urgent matter that we collaborate in this, on this, well, the advisory opinion, but also the collaboration between borders of young people all over the world, standing in solidarity with each other. So just a short mention of these organizations. De Jonge Klimaatbeweging, both ends, SDG Netherlands, UN Youth Impact, Nationale Jeugdraad, the Dutch Youth Council, and Defense for Children. And before I invite our amazing panel who are sitting here at the front, very excited to be here, I just would like to highlight the importance of the advisory opinion. So if I'm going to say advisory opinion, we sometimes say the AO. If you don't understand anything I'm saying, you can also ask questions, because I'm on this stage, but you're here as well. It's quite important. Before we dive deep into this, I'm wondering who has been at the climate strikes when it was possible, but also maybe at the recent climate strikes. Show of hands. Okay, so what is one of the things we say a lot of the times? I'm hoping I'm gonna get the right response. So when I say, what do we want? You say? Climate justice. No, okay, we're gonna try it one more time, because you have to yell it like we're on the streets together, okay? So what do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now. Okay, that's better. That's better. Thanks, guys. So the beautiful thing is, this global youth movement, Youth for Climate Justice, World Youth for Climate Justice, they took this climate justice from the streets, and now they're taking it to the International Court of Justice. I'm very proud to be part of this movement, even though it's as a moderator right now, but just to see what we're capable of as a global youth movement, what we can do with the support of everyone also here involved. It's quite something to be proud of. So before introducing our panel, like I said, and you see them here, I don't know who did the stage, prepping, but they put SDG 13 and 16 in front, which is exactly what I want to talk about. Climate action, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The advisory opinion on climate justice will have a unique opportunity to make sure that these two are strengthened and connected. So I would give you now the opportunity to give a very, very, very warm welcome to our panel. I'm going to invite, we have an all-female panel, by the way, today, which is quite rare. Okay. I like it. Give a warm welcome to our panel. Ladies, I would like to join me up on the stage, and a round of applause, please. Of course, they'll be just fine introducing themselves, but today we're joined by Martine Doppe. We met each other, I think, at COP 20. Yeah, in Katowice. So you've been a climate activist for a very long time now. Do you want to tell the audience something about yourself and why this topic matters to you?
Yes, of course. Is this already on? Yeah. So my name is Martine, and we met in Katowice, and I think that's where my journey started as a climate activist. I met so many people from all over the world, and I really got to understand what the real problem is, that we need to change the entire system itself. And after that, I started working for Milieudefensie, for Friends of the Earth, the Netherlands. And I set up a traineeship for young people about climate justice and in campaigning. And I was a candidate for parliament, for GroenLinks. And now I'm on the list for the gemeenteraad, for the City Council of Amsterdam. And I work as a debate trainer for the Dutch Debate Institute. So every day I'm working with youth and learn them how to express themselves and develop their opinions and really know how to debate. Yeah.
Thank you. Round of applause for Martine. Well, I would say pass the mic on to Carrie.
Thank you. I think we have a lot in common, actually. My name is Carrie van der Kroon, and I work for Defense for Children. I am part of the international programs and the lobby and advocacy that we do. Climate is a newer theme for us, and I think what's worthwhile to mention is that this year we're also reporting to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. I'm very much involved in that, and there we try to incorporate our worries and recommendations when it comes to the environment and climate change related to children's rights. And yeah, fun fact, I started my career in youth participation with the Dutch National Youth Council as well when I was 15, debating trainings and all of that. And yeah, it kind of stuck. We also discussed that. I think that goes for many of you here as well. So thanks for inviting us. I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, applaus voor Carrie alsjeblieft.
Hello, my name is Rose Hendriksen. I'm 17 and I'm here as a member of the UNICEF Youth Panel. As a UNICEF Youth Panel, we are with 15 children. We try to engage and make a change as young people because we think it's important that young people have a voice as well.
My name is Margaretha Weverinck-Singh. I teach international law at Leiden University, and I'm also an adjunct senior lecturer in environmental law at the University of the South Pacific, where I used to be based in Vanuatu. I'm also a practicing lawyer. I practice from a small boutique environmental justice firm based in Guam called Blue Ocean Law. And I've been involved in quite a number of legal cases that seek to promote climate justice through the courts.
Thank you. Our amazing panel, ladies and gentlemen. I just remembered myself. I'm just so enthusiastic about this all that we also have a video about the advisory opinion. I'm looking to the technician up there. Do we have a video? Can we insert it? Okay, that's great. Just to give you.
In every year of the last decade, our world has seen greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and shatter records. But those responsible for burning the most fossil fuels have not experienced the most direct consequences of climate change. It has been us. It has been us. The hundreds of millions of people living on the front line of the climate crisis. If global temperatures rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius in my lifetime, countries like mine will vanish beneath the waves. I will be forced to leave the land where my ancestors are buried, and to tell my children they have nowhere to call home. At Rio de Janeiro, Kyoto, and later at Paris, we were promised action. But despite ever more opportunities to address this crisis, the planet is hurtling towards climate catastrophe. Existing international agreements have not provided countries with legal clarity on their responsibilities to reduce emissions, leading to inaction. To break the impasse, the UN General Assembly must request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change and human rights. All it would take is a simple majority vote from UN member states. An advisory opinion is not legally binding but carries great legal and moral authority, encouraging all nations to protect the human rights of people affected by climate change. An opinion from the highest court in the world would also help to build a critical global coalition uniting governments and international institutions, and would define exactly what existing bodies of laws nations should follow. In the past, advisory opinions have been instrumental in establishing international laws on the right to self-determination, the prevention of genocide, and nuclear disarmament. We believe it could do the same for climate change. A planet in crisis doesn't have to be our future. If there is power in the world to save humanity from environmental disaster, it is the power of the people. But time is running out, and we have to act now. Please visit our website to join us.
Oh, it's all quiet. Oh, thank you. Maybe just to respond, like also what is climate justice. But Roos, do you want to respond or tell a little bit about how you feel about this topic?
About climate justice? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that it's not only the matter of the global warming and the climate change, but it's also important to acknowledge the people that are that suffer from the consequences the most. I think that we now have many people that left the biggest footprint, that have earned a lot of money to protect themselves against the consequences that the climate change now, the disasters that are that climate change has caused. So it's important to acknowledge the people that, the normal people that don't have the money to protect themselves, that they are acknowledged as well, and they are being heard. And I think that's what climate justice is about.
Yeah. Corrie, do you maybe want to respond?
Thanks. It just reminded me of the worldwide climate, what was it again? The Children's Rights and Climate Risk Index that UNICEF International has published. It's already clear that every child in the world is being affected by at least one environmental hazard, while half of the world's children is at an extremely high risk. Not in the future, but right at this very moment. And when I heard about the advisory opinion, I thought it was brilliant. I wish I had thought of it. And it's quite a different framework from the one that I operate with every day, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I think we need all of those different instruments. They're all a piece of the puzzle. So we are very happy to contribute to your cause, and I'm here to tell you that there's also a couple of interesting things happening with the UN Convention and the committee that you can all contribute to.
Thank you. Margaretha, climate justice, what does it mean to you?
Well, there are many dimensions to it, but I'd like to highlight two. So the first is indeed the reality that people today are already experiencing the adverse effects of climate change, and those who are marginalized or who are already vulnerable suffer most. So for me, it was my first, I think, really direct experience of climate injustice was when I arrived in Vanuatu to take up my position as a lecturer at the School of Law. 3 days after I arrived, there was a Category 5 cyclone, Cyclone Pam, that just destroyed most of the country. It was a typical island paradise when I arrived, with white sand beaches and palm trees and all very lush and green. And just 3 days later, there was mainly debris. Most buildings were destroyed, no electricity anymore. Everything looked just brown, and palm trees were literally gone, and most vegetation was gone. So food sources were gone. The right to food. Houses were destroyed, and so the right to housing had been violated. People had been killed, the right to life. So there are these human rights violations that are already happening. And this, while the country was still recovering and children were still going to school in tents provided by UNICEF, if at all. Many children had dropped out and never went back to school. Another Category 5 cyclone happened. So again, destroying villages, destroying people's gardens, etc. And who pays for this at the moment? It's the victims. It's those who are suffering the damages. They pay the price for it, while having contributed virtually nothing to the problem. So that is, I think, one of the most important climate justice dimensions that international law should seek to address. And then, of course, there's also the reality that we are running out of time to keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, right? That is what was highlighted in the little clip. More than 1.5 degree of warming means the end of the habitability of small island countries like Kiribati, Tuvalu, Tokelau, the Marshall Islands, the Maldives, they'll just be completely inundated with more than 1.5 degrees of warming. And we're heading towards, as you know, 2.7 degrees. Based on the pledges that have been submitted under the Paris Agreement. If these pledges would be fulfilled, which is another question because they're voluntary pledges, but if they would be met, we're heading towards 2.7 degrees of warming. So that's a catastrophe. That's the other dimension. That is also very much the intergenerational dimension, because it is future generations who will suffer most from that.
And it's also, of course, who's being hit, like Roos also mentioned. We're not feeling these kinds of consequences here. I think I could say that most of us are very privileged in terms of this. I think we definitely all are here on stage, that we're quite privileged to not be affected directly maybe yet, even though you have experienced it directly, which I think was quite devastating maybe to see. Martina, would you also like to address the room, maybe what climate action, but also climate justice means to you?
Yes. I think first of all, it is that the people who are responsible for this climate crisis are also taking the responsibility in climate action first. But it's very much about a system change. So at the moment we are mainly focusing on the symptoms, but we should be very critical about the system we are living in. And the system is based on a colonial history. It is based on gender inequality. It's based on so much inequality in this world, and that's why we can keep on growing. So I think climate justice means smashing the patriarchy, smashing racism, smashing all these unequal systems. Yeah, and I think it's a lot, but at the moment we are still only focusing on symptoms, and I think we first have to be very clear about what is broken on this system and what is that is destroying our planet and the people, especially the people, because like as was mentioned before, genocide is going hand in hand with ecocide. It is inseparable if you look into our history. So I think we have to be very much focused on how to decolonize our system and how to smash all the inequality. Yeah.
Thank you for that contribution. You mentioned, a system change, and what we've seen happening is that there's a whole new generation growing up within systems that were created before they had the say in it. Still, a lot of young people aren't able to vote. How can you change a system that you're not, like we're not the big players, we don't have. I was going to say we don't have that much power, but then
we have a lot of power.
We have a lot of power, but are there more ways in which we can try to break these generational curses or patterns that have been here? Because it's always been done like this. That's the worst thing I feel anyone can say. We do this because it's always been done like this. What do you feel we can do to break these patterns? How can we check out of the loop?
Yeah. At first, I think showing our power, like going on the streets and show how powerful we are as humans by connecting to people from all over the world all together. And I think especially young people, they're not yet part of these institutions, so they clearly see what's wrong. And I think it's even though many of us can't vote, which I hope in the future, from 16 years, we will be able to vote. But we can be part of this democracy and really turn from consumers into citizens and see also what our responsibility is as a citizens. As you mentioned, we are very privileged people being able to sit here and talk about these things. And I think that comes with a responsibility by putting, really pushing our governments and really spending our time wisely for climate action. So I think a lot of us are already doing these things, but I think we should keep on going by connecting to people from all over the world, doing things like going to the court, like what Milieudefensie is doing, taking Shell to court. These are all things from the public. It's not only Milieudefensie taking them to court, but it's with a lot of other people, with 17,000 people altogether. I think it's a very powerful thing to do.
Yeah, of course you can respond, definitely.
I think there's a couple of opportunities that young people really can and should use. For instance, the Human Rights Council passed a resolution in 2019 already saying that governments have the obligation to support children and young people in their environmental rights defense. And that was funnily, or not funnily, enough at the same time as the school strikes, when Minister Sloop, do you remember what he said about the school strikes? Anyone? You can do that on a Saturday. Saturday is a beautiful day to strike. Not taking seriously the civic and participation rights that children have under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 12, you have the right to participate, so you can demand to be at the table, to be part of the discussion. We're not there yet with really like having defined what the responsibilities are that governments have in this kind of support, but I think that at least it should mean that they don't exclude you or restrict your civic and participation rights. Another avenue, we're reporting every 5 years on the state of children's rights to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. That's a moment to show your stance and let your voice be heard. And the Youth Council has done so. Tomorrow we're having a conversation with a couple of committee members on environmental issues in the Netherlands and climate change and the worries that children have. And the committee has also said, we're going to make a new general comment. And that means that's a sort of a document where they explain what your rights are with regards to, in this case, environment and climate change, and where the obligations of states will be defined. And it's not just that these UN experts are going to write that. We can all take part. So I think that the child rights movement, the environmental rights movement, and the youth movements, we should collaborate more and jointly contribute to these discussions, because there's really concrete opportunities and things that we can do together to influence the agenda. You have more power than you may be aware of.
And more rights, it seems.
Yes.
I mean, we have these rights, but I don't know if all of you are aware of the rights that you have. I know I don't. I'm curious, Roos, because you're 17. I mean, we discussed this backstage. I'm 26. I'm not that old, but... oh, there's laughing about that? Okay. But we discussed this backstage. I cannot imagine being where you are right now, even at the age of 17. When you hear this from Carrie, talking about the rights that we have as young people, that children have, like, did you know? Do you think that if you knew, it would be easier to working on climate change?
Yes, I think that it's true. Many children, I think, aren't aware of the rights they have. I think, many young people think like, okay, I can say something about it, but I don't think I'm being heard. Like, many young people have the idea that they aren't being heard to, they aren't being listened to. So, and then with the climate strike, we were protesting for the climate change, and we made our voices heard. So I think it's very important that now they listen to what young people have to say about climate change. But only listening to young people, I think, isn't enough. I think it's also very important that young people are getting involved in the decisions that are being made. I think it's, we can say our opinion about what we think, but I think we also need to participate in the solutions that are being made. Because, it's about our future. So, it's important that we are being involved in it as well.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, Margaretha, because we're talking about youth a lot of the time, but there's also other generations that are here. We also hear a lot of people always say youth is growing up, young and future generations, blah, 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 to, mention the speech of Greta Thunberg. But there are also a lot of different generations that hold a lot of power right now, that are head of big institutions, a lot of wealth maybe, that they can put to good use. What about intergenerational climate justice? Margaretha, do you have a vision about this?
A vision is a big word, but I think it is important for generations to find friends, and for young people to find friends also who belong to, like, let's say, older generations. And there's a person who comes to mind who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but it is somebody who really had a vision of intergenerational equity and justice, and that is the former judge, Vera Montre. So those of you who have studied international law may have heard of his work and his judgments, and especially his dissenting opinions that he wrote when he was a member of the International Court of Justice. So one piece of legal writing that I would highly recommend you read, even if you're not a lawyer, and I promise this is not going to be boring and technical, as most legal writing is, but that is his dissenting opinion that he wrote in the Nuclear Weapons Advisory Opinion. And that dissenting opinion may have cost him his re-election as a member of the court. So that is also a sign of, I think, real courage for a judge to come up with an opinion that he knew was going to not down well with the powers that were going to vote on his re-election, and so they voted against his re-election. But that dissenting opinion is full of really important prose that is very important also for the advisory opinion on climate change that the youth is advocating for. So it articulated the principle, the legal principle, that a state must act with due diligence to prevent transboundary environmental harm. So it must regulate activities within its own territory to make sure that other countries do not suffer harm as a result of what happens in that state's territory. That's a very important principle. And the opinion also talks about human rights, about the rights of future generations, which many international lawyers will be hesitant to even speak about, because then they would wonder where, in which treaty can you find that future generations have rights. But in the mind of a truly visionary lawyer, future generations have rights just like everybody else. The fact that they don't exist is not a reason to discriminate against future generations. So it's kind of a logical consequence of the human rights that are recognized as universal rights. And so based on these principles, Judge Vera Montre was the only judge on the court to come to the conclusion that the use of nuclear weapons is illegal under international law at all times, no matter what. No excuses, no buts, no ifs. And these kind of visionary people, and he was already senior at the time, but these kind of visionary people exist in all societies, in all generations, and I think it's important to identify them, work with them, and then transform the systems.
So if I'm correct, right now there's no such thing as a protection of rights for future generations.
That's, well, so you can argue about it.
Is it quite okay? Because I've heard some stories over the years about this, working backstage on the advisory opinion with my then colleague Eva, who's all the way in the back. And then we discussed this also, like you have younger generations, but you also have future generations. And once we mentioned future generations, everybody was panicking because that was too difficult. And how do you? And I think from your response, it is still too difficult. Or are there people brave enough working on that?
I want to avoid making this a completely legal conversation, but the question, the recent court ruling in Germany, I thought they did, yeah, can you maybe explain, or how do you see that then, their reference to the future generations?
Yeah, so so the case was brought on behalf of young people. They were the plaintiffs in the case. They brought the case, so it was about their rights. So it's not as such a case that was brought by future generations, but it does very much recognize the principle of intergenerational equity, because the court said you cannot postpone further climate action because the burden that you're then placing on future generations is then too big. You have to act sooner. In order to prevent shifting the burden of action to the future, affecting young people.
To avoid shifting the burden?
to avoid the burden of action. So you shouldn't you shouldn't expect future generations to deal with the mess that the present generations have created.
Which is what is happening currently, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why the court found in that case that Germany's climate plan, even though it had a nice faraway target of net zero emissions by 2050, in the quite faraway future, a nice target. Despite that, the court found that the Climate Act was not constitutional because in the near term, Germany was not doing enough. Germany needed to do more sooner.
That's a good outcome, I guess. That's okay. We have a future generations in the back as well. Oh, young generations in the back. Okay, so I also heard you, Margrethe, mentioning courage, and I wanted to go to Martine for that. We know each other, and in my eyes, you're one of the courageous persons that is trying to make change happen. You're currently organizing a train to COP, to the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow.
Yeah.
How are you guys making sure that that is an inclusive train? Like, how do you, it's mainly the question, how do you get everyone on board, but how are you making sure that everybody is on that train?
Yes. Well, I think we tried very hard to get many people from all over Europe, people from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different gender identities. And I think that's the hardest thing in building a movement, because as we all said, like, we are very privileged people that we have time to be here at this moment. And you see that people who are being oppressed in this world often don't have space in their brain, space in their time schedule to fight for against the climate crisis. And so I think the first thing we need to do is to get enough funding to make sure that people who are not able to pay get a refund from the organization. So that's the first thing we need to do, like refund everything from the entire trip for people. Also, it is a sustainable train to the climate, to the COP, but of course, like, train networks in Europe are not perfect yet. So, for example, people from Ukraine, they can't travel for 24 hours to Amsterdam first to get on the climate train. So you also have to be like, okay, then they have to take a plane, even though our train is for sustainable travel. So all these things, and getting in touch with people from all over Europe, people from different movements, people who are in the LGBTQ plus movement, people are fighting against racism, getting them all together and see, like, what the connections are, like how everything is related to the climate crisis. And still, I think on our train will be mainly high educated young white women. Even though we put a lot of effort in getting a more diverse audience there. So I think this is the most difficult thing. And what we need to do is really, like, putting up front what climate justice is, and that it is about all these different forms of oppression, addressing them, and really have a clear vision on that. And I think we've done, like, the last years, we weren't that clear about it. We were also focusing on system, on the symptoms instead of on system change. Yeah. So I think it's the most difficult thing to do, but we keep on learning.
Yeah, because if I look at the climate movement in the Netherlands, we're quite, if I dare to say, a white climate movement in the Netherlands, predominantly a white climate movement. We've had a lot of discussions, especially the Black Lives Matter movement triggered a lot of climate activists to look at a more diverse and inclusive climate movement, even though we're still on the stage, all white females, to address the elephant in the room maybe, which is, also good, but to ask the question of how can we be inclusive, I thought to improvise and ask the audience maybe, because we are definitely a bubble right here on the stage. So if anyone has a suggestion on how to get out of your own bubble and be inclusive and talk to others, well, I was going to say yell it. That's maybe not so good to do that now, but, have a discussion during the break with everyone, mingle, make sure that we know each other, Make sure that we step outside of the bubbles that we're in. It can be quite hard to look beyond your own bubble. We've tried it a lot too. Maybe we should, always say try harder. But let's make sure that we use this opportunity to get to know each other today. I got a sign that the time's almost up for now. We have something to start off the break. Who of you knows what this is? I haven't seen the slide. A Mentimeter. Is there anyone who doesn't know how a Mentimeter works or looks at this slide and thinks, I have no idea what you're asking me to do right now? Yeah, a lot of people are grabbing their phones. Grab your phone. Go to menti.com. Use the code. Is it readable for everyone? Yeah. If it's not, ask your neighbor. Make contact with people what the code is. I can also say that loud. 2827865. And fill in your answer to the question of what do you think is most important when addressing inclusive climate action. Stop capitalism. I have a feeling I know the person who submitted this comment. But just fill it in, take some time. We're going to take a break. We were supposed to take a break till 5, but we're running a little bit late. So make sure we have until 5? Okay, we have until 5, and then please be seated back here. And in the meantime, fill it out and mingle, please. Thank you very much. And a big applause for our panel as well. that everybody's mingling, that we're having some really interesting conversations together. It's also very interesting that I think we started also with stop capitalism, and now it turns out to be the biggest word on the Mentimeter. Just for a show of hands, who put in the Mentimeter stop capitalism? Oh, so shy, don't be shy, it's the biggest word on here. Okay. I can't really go off stage, but just yell to me, why? Stop Shell.
Exactly. You cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet.
Okay,
so
just repeating for the people at home, because I don't know if they can hear you, we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. So stop capitalism. Out of our comfort zone, building bridges. I hope we're building bridges today, being together right here. Intersectionality, education, definitely interesting to see indigenous people, indigenous values also, very important. I think we're going to continue talking about this also in the panel. Just to give you a heads up, we decided in the break that we want to hear from you as well. So if you have some questions for our panelists, if our panelists have some questions for you, raise your hand. I think we will have a microphone. I'm looking around in the room. Who was going to do this? I'm going to take one of your microphones, if that's okay. Is there anyone who is going to... Yeah, do you want to... Thank you so much. So if you have a question for our panelists, I heard some already. We're going to start off first, just an introduction a little bit, and then we're going to make it a discussion together, because it would be a waste. We planned to, continue the discussion amongst the panelists, but it would be a waste to not have a conversation between all of us here. Welcome back on the stage. Let's see, next slide, please. Thank you. The role of the Netherlands in pursuing climate diplomacy at the UN. And I'm going to sit down for a bit. But maybe we can pass the mic all the way here, and we can start with you, Margaretha. We are talking about the advisory opinion today a lot. Maybe you would like to sketch for us, dive a little bit deeper in what the advisory opinion means to this generation, what it could do and what the timeline is, what we have to do to make it happen.
So what is an advisory opinion? An advisory opinion is a statement essentially that explains what international law has to say about a particular problem or question. So it's an answer to a legal question. So the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, you can say, can essentially do two things. It can issue judgments in disputes between states, and it can issue advisory opinions. And that is what the world's youth have proposed the court does. And I think the slogan of bringing the world's biggest problem before the courts, the world's highest court, is quite powerful and captures it well. So we have climate change is being brought before the courts already since the late 1980s. There have been about 2,000 cases brought thus far before courts all around the world on climate change. But and about 200 of those cases address climate change from a human rights perspective. So that's also an important growing trend. But the International Court of Justice, the highest court in the world, has never really dealt with climate change. Once in a dissenting opinion, in one case, climate change was marginally addressed, but not really confronted head on. And why would it be valuable for the International Court of Justice to address climate change in an advisory opinion? You may be skeptical about the value of an advisory opinion because it's not legally binding as such. So that may make you wonder, what does it mean and how will it have an effect if it's not even binding? But it can help in the struggle for climate justice in at least 3 different ways. It can provide clarity about what exactly states need to do to comply with their obligations under international law. And even it can emphasize that there are obligations in the first place, because there are unfortunately many governments that believe that they do not have any obligation whatsoever to do anything about climate change under international law. And why not? Because the main legal instrument to deal with climate change is the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement is based on voluntary commitments. So states, they can decide for themselves what they want to do, and then once they have resolved to do something, they're not bound to do that. It's all voluntary under the Paris Agreement. And why do we have such a weak mechanism? Well, unfortunately, the reality is that states did not want to sign up to binding commitments because they had no intention of taking climate change really seriously enough. So that's the situation that we are in from an international law point of view. So an advisory opinion can clarify that there are obligations, and those are not just obligations that arise from the Paris Agreement, but from many other different treaties, including, importantly, international human rights law. So that is about protecting the rights of children, of women, of indigenous peoples, of everyone, and present and future generations. And by virtue of those rights, states need to take action to make sure that we don't exceed 1.5 degrees. So, we enhance ambition so that instead of 2.7 degrees of warming, we'll get at 1.5. And then also saying about providing benchmarks, clarity about how that needs to be done. So articulating principles such as the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities.
I've heard that term so many times. So common but differentiated responsibilities, you guys, it means that everyone has a responsibility, but not everyone has the same responsibility. So I am more responsible because I emit more, for example, than someone who has a really low carbon lifestyle. That's basically, and what I also noticed, and I don't know if you guys noticed or anyone in the audience, is that taking responsibility, parties, but people also taking responsibility, I feel like it lacks the courage for people to really say, this is our responsibility and this is what we're going to do about it. Because if parties or people say, I am responsible for this, then of course it has consequences and you have to take action. Which is, I can guess, I mean, I don't work in law or anything, but I can guess that it's not the kind of situation you want to put yourself in.
No, exactly. It's about states not wanting to take responsibility to cut their emissions. That's one thing. And states also do not want to take responsibility to address the consequences of climate change for those who suffer most. And this goes as far as states having included a clause in the decision that accompanied the Paris Agreement, which reads, this provision, and that is about a provision that deals with loss and damage from climate change. This Article 8 of the Paris Agreement does not provide or involve a basis for any liability or compensation. And when I overheard in Paris at the negotiations a US negotiator saying to another US person, we got protection from liability, so a responsibility for dealing with the consequences of climate change. So it's deliberate that states, that victims are paying rather than that the polluter is paying. And that's a situation that needs to be addressed, but it's very difficult to address because you go right against the status quo. And an advisory opinion is not going to be a silver bullet that solves that situation completely, but it brings us a step closer by highlighting that these obligations exist under international law. And such a clause as that clause in the Paris Agreement doesn't override those existing obligations, which are in a way, they're more important. They carry more weight. Human rights cannot just be erased by a little clause in some COP decision.
I think he agrees with you. Thank you for elaborating on this. I think, Corrie, you also, we had a really interesting conversation going on. Can we pass the mic? I know, I'm so sorry you only have one mic now, but let's work together on this.
there's so many different things that I would like to say. The advisory opinion, one argument that I would like to add why it is important is for civil society and for youth movements and children's movements, it's also a nice document and an argument to negotiate and to continue their lobby and advocacy. That's why we as Defense for Children would be very happy if it would be brought about. I think you're hinting at another subject that we were discussing in the break, right? Yes, because also within the youth movement on climate, I noticed just now that there's also intergenerational differences, because younger children may experience this topic very different from 17, 18 or 20-year-olds. And we were discussing we might not notice yet the impact really here in the Netherlands. And I beg to differ, because air pollution is a huge problem in the Netherlands. Children in Groningen are very much affected by the drilling and are already experiencing all sorts of mental, but also other kinds of issues in their lives. The children in the Eimond regio as well, and tomorrow we'll be discussing that, or 2 children of 12 years old will be discussing that with the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. So sadly, 1 in 5 children in the Netherlands with asthma, that's correlated or caused by air pollution. So in the Netherlands now, children are already feeling the consequences and the climate hazards. So if you want to make this movement inclusive, it's also good to reach out, I think, to younger peers, younger children, and take them on your bandwagon to Glasgow, or in the conversations, because not every child or every young person is the same and experiencing the same.
So having this conversation intergenerationally is very important.
To make it even more difficult. So that's the difficulty, I think, of being a child or a young person. It's so, there's so many different things and different groups within that.
Just before we're heading to the questions of the audience, Roos, I'm really wondering, we are hopefully not in the midst of the pandemic anymore, but it's been quite difficult to maintain the momentum for youth movements to make sure that climate action was top priority on the agenda. How do you feel about making sure that we again have this momentum as a youth movement? How do you think the pandemic affected the youth movement? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yes, I think with climate change it's very hard, because with the pandemic we see the people that are being affected by the pandemic, it's obvious, like, okay, this person gets sick because he apparently has had contact with another person, and now he suffers the consequences. Well, with climate change it's like hard, because we don't, the cause of everything isn't so obvious, so it's hard to keep that same momentum we had with the corona crisis in the climate crisis. I do think that it's important that the momentum is being that there are that attention is being that there is attention for climate change. It's a very important issue. So I think it's a very hard, but it's worth that we try and keep trying and keep keep saying our opinions and keep asking for attention for this topic.
Totally agree. It reminds me what you're saying. I don't know if any of you ever heard of the example of slowly cooking frogs. I'm vegan, so don't worry. But they say, like, when you... I have no idea if this is true, actually, but it is an example that if you put a frog into a pan on the stove in water, and you turn it on and you cook it slowly, that it will stay in the water, because the changes are too slow for it to notice that the water is heating. But so it will stay and it will cook to dead, sadly. But if you put it in a pan that's already boiling, it will jump out. So the longer it will take, like the slower or the less visible the consequences are, even though I think right now the consequences are being more and more visible about the climate crisis. For me, it feels like slowly cooking humans sometimes on this example.
Yeah, I also think that with the corona crisis, we saw that in the beginning, people were like, okay, we need to stop this. We do everything we want. And yeah, after a period of time, people were done with it. The attention was drawn away, even though the problem wasn't solved. And I think with climate change, it's maybe the same thing. It's something that takes so long that many people don't find the attention to keep giving attention to the problem. So yeah, I think that's also a problem that we have with climate change.
Yeah, the long-term thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. No! Oh, I'm getting waved at that we have such short time, and I was planning on, doing so much interaction with everyone, but I do, because I already received the question in the break. Do you want to ask your question? Do we have the microphone?
So, what role do you see for the Netherlands to give a voice to people worldwide so they can be heard? So it's actually the question of how can it be inclusive, but do you see for their voice to be heard? How can they be heard? Because like you said, we are privileged, we are all here, but are there ways for them to be heard? So.
Is there anyone who wants to answer this question?
I think the biggest responsibility of the Netherlands is like taking the responsibility for the businesses here, for the shells on this earth, for ABP, big pension funds who are investing a lot of money in, for example, Vaca Muerta, which is in Argentina. It's like the biggest oil fracking zone, something that's forbidden here in Europe, and still with public money of the Netherlands, we keep on doing stuff there and destroying the lives of indigenous peoples there, destroying their culture, destroying everything. So really taking the responsibility for our companies internationally, I think that's the main thing we should focus on.
Thank you. Yeah, we have very limited time, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. I completely agree. And there's one thing that we need to resolve. Has anyone of you checked the annual budgets of the government? Yes, some of you. Have you noticed that in the budget of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is room for climate programming and climate diplomacy, and a central role for women because they are the actors of change, and that's very important and necessary. That will also maybe ensure that in worldwide it can be more inclusive, and that a stage is being given. But I was really upset that children and youth were not mentioned there. So I think it starts there too, that we need to have a discussion with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the role of children and young people who are worldwide at the forefront, that they're being recognized in climate diplomacy and climate programming as the change makers. So I think we have a sort of root cause that we need to address now. I hope it makes you as angry as it made me angry too. Yeah, I hear yes.
Okay, one more question. Please continue also this discussion afterwards, but I promised to someone in the back to have the last question. Yes.
Thanks. Okay, so I kind of wrote down some of my thoughts here, but I will try to be really brief. And I think overall, talking about the intergenerational value of it, it just made me think of that phrase by Emerson that it's that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow from our children. So we are really borrowing this space to leave for others, right? And I think we should take that very seriously. And folks who have been dealing with this and fighting for this since forever are the indigenous communities. They are continue to value their ancestors' teachings and nourishing their territory and their culture to the future generations. And we're not really listening to them. So while thinking of like the role of countries and governments and, you know, the case of Netherlands, I wanted to, and I'm from Brazil, so I'm Juliana I would just wanted to point out that, for instance, I just found out very shockingly that after China, Netherlands are the second importer of soy from Brazil. And I wonder if, it's kind of like two questions. So if we could like deepen a bit the debate about stop capitalism and, you know, indigenous values and climate justice, and think what's the role of private companies for those countries. I know somebody already just mentioned about that, but like, you know, how could we go more in depth about that? And also on that front, to see if there's a Dutch or EU law that prohibits imports and goods and services coming from, you know, that originate from deforestation. So, so I guess that's my question.
Thank you so much. Anyone wants to respond?
Well, I think this is the most important thing, like protecting indigenous rights and indigenous liberation, putting that in, and also that the, like within the culture of most indigenous peoples, they're thinking 7 generations in the future. So we also have to be humble to learn from their culture and to learn and not valuing our Western solutions so high, but just learn like they know what needs to be done, and yet they are being destroyed by our companies. We stole their lands and we stole their future, and now we just keep on going. So. And I think, I don't know, like law-wise, what needs to be done, but I think we need the EU especially to do it like all together. I think the Netherlands, like even though we are mostly responsible, I think we need collaboration within the EU and kind of build a wall to make sure that nothing is coming in that is destroying peoples and that they have to pay a lot of taxes. And I think GroenLinks is working on it on the EU level, I know, but I don't, like maybe you know more about the technical things of these kind of laws or these kind of tax policies. Do you?
Really short answer, because we have someone waiting, I guess.
Not so much about the tax policies as such, but I think a point to highlight, to bring it back to the campaign for an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, is the awareness-raising function that it would have. So the advisory opinion is not binding, and it's of course about international law. It only applies to states, but it does have an impact of declaring what is legal and what is not legal in a way that goes much further than clarifying what the law that applies between states. And here a nice example comes from Philip Sands, who observed that after the whaling case, Australia versus Japan, where the International Court of Justice found that Japan's whaling program was illegal. There was a market vendor at the market, I think it was in Kyoto, that put up a notice that said no whale meat anymore is sold here anymore, in accordance with the judgment of the International Court of Justice. So the judgment obviously doesn't apply to the vendor, but this is how he had resolved in his mind. And so an International Court of Justice advisory opinion could similarly clarify that climate change, making it even worse and grabbing indigenous people's land to destroy the world even further, is just not something that is acceptable anymore on the international laws. I can't wait for these notices to be put up in Shell closing its doors, because International Court of Justice has said that it was over now with that nonsense.
Okay, I think we will take that as an end statement, because we have run out of time for our panel. But please give a very loud applause for our panelists today. Ladies, you can go sit in front, please. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not done. I'm staying for now. I'm not done yet, but thank you. Yeah. Because it's my honor, and I hope we continue this discussion, but it's my honor to introduce our key speaker. She's already here. I see she's arrived. Her Royal Highness Princess Laurentien of the Netherlands. She's an advocate for child and youth participation, but also a founder of the Number 5 Foundation. So please give a very warm round of applause for Her Royal Highness.
Thank you very much. And I was listening, well, first of all, to the baby. Where's the baby? There's the baby. Oh, there's the baby. Fantastic. We're doing this, we're talking about this for you. And I was listening just for a few minutes in the room next door, and I know you've been talking and listening and hopefully thinking about how to move this on for the last couple of hours, and so it kind of feels strange that I kind of come in and fly in, and but again, the last few panel thoughts kind of gave me an idea. So a few thoughts from me that you've asked me to do with great pleasure, and as you can see, I'm a big fan of the Nationale Jeugdraad, that I am allowed to be on the board of advisors, but I don't know who's advising who, actually. It's always the other way around. A few thoughts. I stand here, I have to say, in two minds. Because a few weeks ago, I was standing on a podium at the IUCN conference on biodiversity. And as we were preparing for the big splash opening with the president of France and all kinds of individuals, in a great hall next door, there was the youth conference. And I swore that it was the last time ever to be standing at a separate youth conference. And I said it with a deep passion, because it is such a glaring thought that here we are in a hall, and on the other side, it's the adults who are making the decisions. And I'm done with it. I will repeat that. I'm done with that. And I mentioned there that in the 1982, at the Rio conference, we had a plea at the conference there, who said all the right things, 1982, and look where we are now. And I'm done with it. So I want to repeat that, and I'm glad to see that there's a few older people as well. But I really mean it. I get more and more uncomfortable that the gratuitous aspects of youth participation, I'm uncomfortable with it. And yet I stand here, particularly on the issue of climate justice. And I want to share thoughts and tips and maybe just a few reflections. Take the idea of, are we going down the same path of reframing this with all the lessons learned, the urgency that we have, and that you... So I'm saying to all the young people here, in the reframing, be as bold as you can be. Don't go the harmonious, nicer path, because it didn't bring us far enough. It didn't bring you far enough. It didn't bring Severin Suzuki far enough. It didn't bring Greta Thunberg far enough. So this movement needs to be as bold as you can be. Interestingly, I talked to Mary Robinson 10 years ago about climate justice. So I can tell you, I feel ashamed that 10 years later, I'm standing here, and I know it was there, but I didn't really act upon it. And I didn't really take it into the work that I do, so you've opened my eyes. So with that, all that to say, this is why I'm here, to come and apologize in a way to that 10 years ago. The interesting thing, I think, now that you've allowed me to kind of, and kind of tickled me to delve into that 10 years ago, yeah, what was that all about again, that climate justice? Interestingly, when you start thinking about it, it's got the double layers why should young people take this up as an issue? It's got the double layers of exactly what climate justice is all about. It's about the marginalized people. But again, you are the experts, I'm not. It's about marginalized issues and looking at this issue from the marginalized perspective by the people who are marginalized themselves and not taken seriously in the climate debate. So it is young people, par excellence, who need to bring up this issue to the table. And you are the only credible people who are bringing this to the table of the decision makers. But it's a kind of, this is the level of discomfort you need to start seeking. And in that, I think a few lessons learned. And that is the difficulty of bringing in the voice of the forgotten people. Bubbles always forget the forgotten people. And we all live in our bubbles. I live in a bubble. Decision makers live in a bubble. Young people of a certain wealth live in a bubble. The realization that we all live in bubbles and that it is very uncomfortable and difficult to listen to the voice of the forgotten people, that is your path. That is your strength. But remember, even if in all the right intentions that we have, here, we're sitting here, but again, that's an assumption, or I speak for myself. I'm an educated, a white person with a certain perspective on life, and I try to be as inclusive as I can be. I can never forget that I am my own bubble as well. So that humility is, I think, really important also for this whole fantastic coalition and climate movement on climate justice. But it is particularly on this issue that you should not fall into the trap of thinking you have the answers. So a deep sense of humility is something that I wish for this coalition. The other thing is indeed the lessons learned from the past. And actually to say, okay, well, it didn't go fast enough last time, from Severin Suzuki, from all the stuff that all the young people and all the others have done. Now, what is the catalyst? What is the faster catalyzing force that we need? So in that urgency, I think what I've seen is that young people, you are so brave. And I feel so ashamed that you are often put aside. One example. Young people demonstrating on the Malieveld here or around the world. What is in the newspapers? That young people go to McDonald's afterwards. So they're not serious. It is a sham. Why are we not talking about decision makers who are talking about climate change, saying the things even if they do the right things, and stepping into their big cars afterwards? It's the same thing as McDonald's. So do not let yourself be put aside and learn those lessons from the past. To conclude, because we have to do much more important things than you listening to me. 5 thoughts that I had. 5 is the most free of numbers. So maybe that is an inspiration, and you're no doubt seeking that. Seek allies. As fast as you can, go to all the places and pockets of energy where they're kind of working on the similar things, even if they're working on other things. Allies. I believe in the power of allyship. Together, you can actually make that wave. The second thing is grab that autonomous role. Do not go for the same format as the ones that you're trying to topple and make them understand your thinking. Don't go for those formats. And I really respect that young people, that you are so respectful for the generation that let you down. You are really respectful. But you can be respectful and be maybe slightly more bolder. And I know in various cultures, there's a sense of, well, the older generation We need to respect them. I think there is a way to be and respectful for that culture and be respectful and at the same time be incredibly, incredibly innovative and disruptive. I believe in harmonious disruption and seek allyship also with the system. The third that I want to mention is remember to be always humble, listen, and always remember that you never quite have the answer about the people who you're doing it for. Doing something for people puts you into the uncomfortable position to then think that you know you're doing it for the right people with all the right intentions, but always remember to keep listening to the people concerned and again, not falling to that trap of thinking that you now do it in the right way. And to decision makers, and it's wonderful that there's 1 or 2 ambassadors here, I believe, please, please, you are the allies and the door openers for the Trojan horse of change, namely young people. We need more decision makers who are the people in between, who understand on the one hand the world of decision making, who understand and appreciate the force for change of young people, but somebody needs to make room for the young people at the table. Not at the end of a process, at the beginning and as equals throughout the process. And we need more people in the middle. And finally, no more separate conferences. I love being here and I love it because I feel again there's a noyau of something that's being born and maybe that's been simmering, but actually please, the faster you can go to the places where the decisions are being made and put that thinking, put that framing, the better off we are. So it is with great pleasure that I am here and I will still say I will not go to separate conferences, except when you're here to actually put a very important issue that has been underlit on the table, and I wish you all the luck, and I'm there to connect and to help be that person in the middle, and hopefully have a lot of others in the middle who understand that your force for change is what we need. Thank you.
See, I was so keen on listening that I forgot my microphone again. It seems to become a habit. But we're also gonna launch the coalition, right? And we're going to need all of you for this, because we're not going to push a button.
Nope.
We're gonna create a wave of change. It sounds woo, what are we gonna do? And it says here, warm up the audience. I don't think I need to warm up the audience. I think we're good, you know, global warming and all. I think we're actually hot right now. But what we're going to do is I'm going to stand right here. If you would join me on stage, on the corner of the stage. We're going to start the coalition by actually making a wave of change. We're going to begin here. You know what we're going to do now, right? Yeah, okay. We're going to start here, all the way over there, and then, you know, applause as loud as you can. That's how we're going to start off this coalition together. I think that's better than pushing a button. So we'll be right here. Be ready. Oh, people are excited. Yeah, I think we need to stand up. Yeah. Very true. Thanks. Will you do me the honor of starting the coalition right there? So I just go like that. Yeah, if you go, everybody here starts, and then we'll go right over there. Applause, people! Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Do you want to say a bit about the coalition, maybe? Or?
Well, I'm excited about this coalition, and who is the most knowledgeable about this coalition? Please. So.
Yeah, come on, Eva.
So I think maybe just a few, so that you actually are the expert and you are the herder of this movement. What do you hope this will generate?
I've had the privilege of working with young people who started this, the advisory opinion movement in the Pacific already in 2019. And when I was at COP, at the Climate Change Conference in 2019, I had the honor of meeting them, and I've had the privilege of working with them ever since. And I think to see their energy, their resilience, their extreme power to overcome every obstacle that is put in their way. And from working with them closely, I can tell you it's really not an easy journey, especially in times of pandemics, in time of climate change. So my hope is that we in the Netherlands can join forces with the young people on the other side of the world who need our help, who need our allyship, and together that we can get to this building, the Peace Palace, for an advisory opinion on climate justice.
A few more questions, because I'm really interested. So, do you feel that? So, actually, you're also bringing that voice into the debate here, which is really powerful. Do you feel that through their own situation, the urgency of the matter, where we've been maybe kind of, we say it's urgent, but not really? Can you tell a little bit about the urgency of the matter that you feel from them that you need to bring to the table?
Definitely. I think one of the quotes I heard my colleague say was that 1.5 degrees will allow us to survive, not to thrive. So I think already for us in the Netherlands, understanding that 1.5 is not just a number, this is really the difference that will affect current generations, future generations. And it's not okay to be aiming for 2 degrees warming or for 2.1 degrees warming. We should be aiming for well, actually, we shouldn't have been aiming for 1.5 to start with, but we're in this situation, so let's aim for 1.5 now that we can, because there is a lot of, depending on us and on our actions and on the responsibility that we should take.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, also, you're in the reframing, you're humanizing also the maybe some abstract issue. I just came from a dialogue with children in the UK online, and they were saying that in education, climate change, it's so abstract. So it's also an opportunity to make it more human, I would imagine.
Definitely. I think what's really at the center of this is the human rights that are at stake and the children's rights that are at stake. And even though law might sound abstract to some people, I think it's really about the voices and the faces of the people and the young people that are being affected. Yeah. So definitely, yeah.
And finally, if any of it, what I said resonated, I'm curious what did and what didn't. And but very much, what do you need from this perspective of you need a seat at the table to understand what room needs to be made for you to actually make this an important point?
I think what is necessary now is that the government of the Netherlands and other European governments really start listening to the young people who are advocating this advisory opinion on climate justice. And we have been advocating this for a couple of years now. So I think what is necessary is that they start listening, they start following this youth leadership that we are showing, and that we join forces to request an advisory opinion by the International Court of Justice.
And just to make it one more step more actionable, if you would be standing in an elevator and you say, okay, I can pick 3 people where I've got 1 minute, 2 minutes to give my thoughts to that person who can actually change something, who would those 3 people be that you'd like to be maybe even stuck in an elevator with?
I think as a Dutch young person, I would choose the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because this person is the person that will take the decision whether the Netherlands supports this or not. I would also choose somebody from the European Union, because ultimately I think it's important that the European states join forces on this together. And I think I would also choose somebody, for example, the Maldives is now the president of the UN General Assembly, and I think yeah, he really understands what we're talking about and why we're doing this. So I would choose him also to make the case also, yeah.
Well, let's make those elevator rides possible. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Also, thank you very much to Your Royal Highness. A big round of applause. Yeah, Eva, I'm just going to keep you here. You know this, right? I'm just going to keep you here. And I want to ask everyone that's joined in this organization of making this happen to join us on stage as well. Ooh, excited? Yeah. There are more people involved in this. Yeah, come on. Join me on stage. Of course, this is only a fragment of the international movement that is happening, but today it's been you who made this happen. Eva, could you just briefly walk us through the follow-up steps? Like, how can we keep track of this? What can we do to push this?
Yes. Before I get to that, I'd also like to say that we have one very dear colleague who unfortunately got COVID, so she's watching the live stream, but she should be standing here as well because she's worked many months on this. What you can do to keep following this movement is that we will produce an outcome report of the great conversations we've had here, and we'll present this hopefully to the ministries and to parliamentarians to make our message. You can follow World Youth for Climate Justice. This is the international movement that is requesting an ICJ advisory opinion. So you can follow us on our website, wy4cj.org, and also on social media, we're active. And what you can do yourself also is take action by organizing seminars, spread the knowledge, have conversations. If you have access to decision makers, make the case or help us make the case to them, because together we will hopefully end up there and make sure that we contribute together to climate justice.
Big applause. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for organizing all of this. I'm not going to let you go yet because I want to do some closing up with you as well. Just, bear with me, but raise your hand, please. Everyone, raise your hand. Thank you. Just put your head to the side. Toot your hand. Take a deep breath in and out. And just, I want to thank you all for being here today. I can imagine for some people it's been quite a rough time, but we're still here. We're still making our voices heard. So give yourself a pat on the back for being here today. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you.
Thank you also to our organizing partners, de Jonge Klimaatbeweging, Milieudefensie, Greenpeace Netherlands, Jongeren Milieu Actief, Both Ends, SDG Nederland, UN Youth Impact, Nationale Jeugdraad en Defence for Children.
Is this still on? Hello? Yes, I forgot something. But because we're going to take a picture, you know more than I do.
Eva, we're going to the Peace Palace, right? In front of the Peace Palace, make a pic. Yes, okay. Well, not everyone, sorry. But that's too many people. Well, we'll let you know. Let's do everybody. Oh no, well, let's do everybody. Yes, let's join. Everybody can come right now.
Everybody, oh, yeah.